In order to explain to you how measuring one of our activities for the first time and how that helped us move forward, I have to take you back first, briefly, to a sunny spring day in 2018, when I was sitting at a table at a cafe across from chairman of a newly established foundation called Save the Forest. And this was going to be my first interview as a journalist. He spread the information that he gathered in front of me on the table and told me, this is all information I have and you're free to use it for the research. But there's one document missing. It's not on the table because I'm not allowed to have it. And he explained with a sigh that he even filed a Freedom of Information request for this document. But the answer was that he couldn't even file a Freedom of Information request for it because the document was classified. So I scribbled down in my notebook on my laptop, on my lap, that Freedom of Information request ? Because I never heard of it then. And went home that evening. Can I turn this a bit, yeah. Went home, and in the evening I looked up online what Freedom of Information was and what Freedom of Information law was about. And I could find very little information about it. The information I found online was outdated. But I could find the statutory text of the law. And because of my legal background, I started reading the text and couldn't find anything about classified being a ground for refusal. So the next day at work, I asked my colleagues, journalists, do you know anything more about this? Is it true that we can't get this document? And they said, yeah, well, classified documents are classified, so end of story. Long story short, we got the document because, as it appeared to be from case law, you can in fact ask for a classified document with a Freedom of Information request, and the classification has to be reassessed. And in our case, the reassessment was in our advantage. The fact that this document wouldn't have been disclosed if I didn't dare to dive into the legal information and case law was so upsetting at the time, because I realized that, if you don't have that knowledge, you just think that no you got was end of story. And especially for journalists, as I was back then, that's frustrating and means end of your research, and the fact that you also cannot control power as you're supposed to as a journalist. So it made me angry and frustrated. So I decided to join a working group of the Foundation of Investigative Journalists in the Netherlands, that with a few of us were trying to raise awareness on access to government information for journalists. And it's where I met Tim Staal, my partner in crime when setting up this organization that we later set up together. But firstly, we were still in that working group together and realizing that there was not much we could provide for journalists. So we started collaborating on setting up two tools with help of the working group. And one of them was to formulate a request itself. And the other one was based on Alavatelli software developed by my society to manage your Freedom of Information procedure and to be able to inform others about your procedure, because everything you communicate with the authority is online and for all to see and react on. But Tim and I realized that journalists are not the only one for who this right to information is. And there engaged citizens, as we started to call them, who use this law as well, like the chairman of Save the Forest, but also lawyers and researchers and NGOs. So we thought it was better to set up an organization that that gathers all these requesters, or at least their efforts to get information disclosed, and not concentrate on journalists only. So after 2 years, in the 2022, we set up Spoon, which is loosely translated as Working Together on Access to Government Information. And we got funding for 3 years from 3 different private funders. And we had a long list of things to do. That was our plan, to finish that list. And of course, as we were going through the list, step by step, doing all the things we promised, we experienced that there was even more to do. And as we were working harder to get more done, there was even more to do. You know how that goes. It keeps on coming, and it never ends. So when it was about and it's also good to tell that there was some buzz going on around transparency back then, because in 2022, the year that we started Spoon, was also the year that there was a new law implemented in the Netherlands, a new freedom of information law, replacing the old one that was from end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. So freedom of information rights were not that new in the Netherlands, but this law was new. So it got renewed attention. And there were 2 political realities at the time that also created more attention for freedom of information in the Netherlands. And one was the aftermath of the COVID-19 policy, and that people wanted to have more transparency about the decisions that were made in those years. And another one was one of the biggest affairs that we had in 20 years, the child care benefits affair, that made access to information and transparency, relatively speaking, hot. So there we were, 2 years in with this new organization, running around, doing everything we could in little time, always too little time, and seeing the to-do list grow. Meaning that maybe for me a bit more than for Tim, I was wondering, because my role is trying to more the back end of the organization. So I was also trying to structure all the activities that we wanted to do, and I was wondering how on earth are we going to structure this. So I was getting more and more stressed and exhausted in trying to find a solution to the never-ending to-do list, and the fact that we needed new funding for the second 3 years that were coming up. And how are we going to choose what to do first and then what to do next, while we were running around doing everything we thought we had to do. And what was that based on? So when end of 2024, in November, Open Up gave a workshop facilitated by my society online. So I was sitting alone in the office behind my laptop. It's going to be a bit of a dramatic scene, but I was very tired. I was, happy that I made it to the workshop to be able to follow what Open Up was going to share with us. And obviously trying to, pay attention. And they started with the title of the workshop, asking us, how do you know your transparency work is making an impact in the world? And the first thought I had was, oh no, impact, another to do. Really? And realizing we didn't have the answer to that. So I was listening to the workshop, but listening, when in the back of your mind you're more planning and thinking what to do next, and realizing that you're behind with stuff. So I was listening, but not listening as much as I would have wanted to, as much as I wanted to. And then by the end of the presentation, I heard Gabriella, executive director of Open Up, mentioning a Slack channel. And I was like, Slack channel, wait, maybe I missed something. And she explained that they used at Open Up this Slack channel. I don't know if you still use it, but back then they used the Slack channel to as an achievement channel. They put little wins. Everybody from the organization could put little wins in that channel. And it could be like a compliment from a partner organization, or Gabriella was joking, not having punched anyone that day. But it made me realize that's what I need. I need some positive effect of what we're doing all day, every day. So it was the end of the presentation. So I turned off the computer and I flipped back through my notes, realizing I might have been, more interesting and more valuable for us than I thought. So what could I find about the notes that I made, and try to memorize what it said. And then, of course, the next meeting was popping up on my screen. So I put the notes away again. I went back to business as usual, doing many things at a time as much as possible. Meaning, I was very happy when Jen, a couple of weeks later, my society emailed me and asked if we wanted to join a impact measurement workshop. Because I realized, I don't have time for it, but I was convinced just enough to realize this might be very interesting for us. And also because when I was flipping through the notes, I realized, okay, so it's good for myself to have these positive feedback from time to time. But obviously, this probably means that it's also good for our organization. But how does one measure something as big and vague as access to government information, whether or not that's improving or not because of our activities, or even worse, democracy? So I said yes, and my society's offer meant also some time to actually do the work, so that made it possible for us to accept the challenge. And Jen started this workshop, as was presented in the Open Up presentation in November, with 3 questions. And I considered this measurement mentorship existed of 3 stages, 3 phases. And the first one was these 3 questions, where she asked us, what are the outcomes? Oh, and we decided to take a ongoing research project, or a research project that we already started in November, but we're still in the middle of it, together with Open State Foundation, also in the room. And we were supposed to finish that in March 2025. So just in time to finish this mentorship in June. So we thought it would be a good activity to measure impact of. But in our defense, we set up the report plan without knowing we would ever measure its impact. So when Jen asked us, what are the outcomes you expect from this project? I was like, outcomes? What's outcomes? Output, outcomes. Okay, outcomes of this project. What change are you aiming for? And for whom? Immediately after confessing that I don't know what outcomes are, I was thinking in outputs. I thought she meant, what do you have to do for the funders to be happy that you did it? And I said, well, do research, write a report, and that's it. And she said, yeah, but what is the outcome you want from this activity? So Tim and I started thinking and realized, okay, so and it should be, according to Jen, in this mentorship, it should be a change you're aiming for. Because outcome, she explained, is this higher level change you're aiming for. So, and she asked us to think very specifically about change in the sense that that we know from what to what, like what's the change, from what is it now and what do you want it to be. So we answered, okay, so the outcome of this project should be a change in narrative. We want the narrative to change from it's impossible to handle large freedom of information requests and therefore the law should be changed to limit its scope, to within the current legal FOI framework there are ample ways to handle such requests. Like there is already a lot you can do to better handle your request. And by doing so, you'll limit the workload and improve the quality of the information provided. So that's a different way of thinking, and we said, yeah, that's what we aim for with this project. That after reading the results of our research, you start to think differently about, in this case, as an example, large freedom of information requests. Because we were looking, I should have told earlier, maybe we were looking at 8 assumptions about how difficult it is to handle freedom of information requests. And one of the difficulties, one of the assumptions that are firmly anchored at Dutch government authorities is that they're too large. A lot of them are too large. So we gave an example, like one of the narrative we want to change is this, from impossible to, okay, there are possibilities. And then the third question in the first phase was, for whom? And obviously we knew we wanted to aim at policymakers. But talking about it with Jen in this mentorship made us realize that's a pretty broad group of people, like which policymakers? And as we didn't immediately have the answer to that, we found names and numbers and profiles when we went into the second phase of the mentorship, which was establishing a before and after. Because for comparing, if you have made any change, you have to know how is it now, how is it at this moment. That's your baseline. And then an after, once you, in our case, published the report, you can measure how it is after publication of your report, to be able to compare the two. I mean, there's a lot in this that makes a lot of sense, but just realizing that it actually helps to measure impact, it makes it worth to go through these steps and make it as specific as possible. So we set up this baseline, meaning that we went back to the report, to our research report, and went into all the footnotes to see what were the exact wording that was used in the documents of which we said, look, they're using this wording and it should be, according to us, that wording, and it's because, and that was our research. We tried to explain how it was, framed wrongly. So we looked into all these documents that we used for the research and found exact wordings, and also found who said those, who was in charge of those documents that we used and who said these words. So our list of very specific people that we were aiming to change their minds of was starting to develop. And this had another advantage, that after the report was finished and we shared it with everyone, we also could target more specific the group of people we really wanted to receive this report. So we sent it to the list that we gathered after establishing the baseline. That those people definitely needed to see our report, and of course we did all other kinds of communications, but that's more like you never know who reads it. So we were sure that these people would see the results. And then we entered into the third phase, the after phase, which meant that we had to control and collect what was happening after publication. So, and I forgot to tell about the baseline, that not only we looked into the documents that were a part of our research, we also contacted these people. So we interviewed them. Never did that before. I mean, we both have experience as journalists, so we interviewed a lot of people, but we never thought of interviewing the people that we were actually wondering what they were thinking and wanted to change the way they think. So we contacted them, and it was much more fun than we expected. And not everybody reacted, of course, and we only had a couple of days, but we had some very interesting conversations that helped us realize how they think. If you want to change someone's thinking, it helps to know how they think to begin with. So in the third phase, in the control and collect phase, we called them again. And we asked, did you read the report? No? You okay, I'll give you some more time and call back next week. And we sent a summary of the report. We did our best to make sure that they actually read the report. And again, had some interesting conversation with them. And also, I'll get to that later. But there was more in those conversations than we ever expected. Also more to continue with. So my main conclusion would be that putting ourselves in the shoes of the people we're trying to change was a very, again, sounds maybe easy or something that we could have expected, but we didn't. So it was good to experience that it's something that's easily forget. You think you do, you think you know, but when you actually ask and go into that effort, you realize you don't, and there's a lot of valuable information in that doing so. So the first results for us, I think mostly, is that there were some interesting reactions that we also used in our communication and will use, because we're still in the middle of that after phase, so not there yet to kind of look back at the whole project yet. But for example, we heard in one of the interviews a consultant of a consultancy agency that's helping the government looking into how freedom of information is implemented at the moment in the Netherlands, say something as literally as, after reading your research, I realized our categories had to change. And we're like, yeah, that's good. And at least now we know, because it might have been that they changed it and we either wouldn't even see it or we would see it only afterwards and have no idea that was because of our report. So those little things mattered to us. And setting up the baseline, for example, we looked into all the documents and reports and saw that there were many counting of freedom of information requests that also included normal information requests. And we're like, that's not fair. You can't say there's so many requests if you count every question that comes into your office as a freedom of information request. So it's made it very specific, looking at it consciously, realizing we can contact these organizations, these authorities, and explain to them that that's not how you should count, and see if in the next report they don't do that anymore. So, the third one was a quote from a journalist we interviewed, and he said, it's funny because I sometimes think, well, maybe I shouldn't ask for information about this because, the authorities, poor authorities, they're already so busy and they have so many requests, because that was the frame that's always out there. But looking at your figures, I see that's not the case, so I shouldn't be that careful in the future. We're like, yeah, you're right. I'm gonna round up. So the most, for me personally, what came out of this mentorship, measuring impact, was the feedback that not only personally, because I like to hear what the effect of our hard work was, but also to have that information as an organization to make the decisions on what to do first and what to do next. Because again, in the middle of all these things to do, apart from that you try to achieve your goal, you have to also have that feedback to double check whether you are. And if you are, then you're doing something that actually works, and it's you can better decide on doing that again next time, or go further with the trajectory you entered. So choosing and prioritize activities was one of an important outputs, I would say, or is it outcome, of this mentorship. And there was higher engagement with the people we tried to change. It was higher use of resources, because we got more quotes out of it. We got more ideas for follow-up. There's a event tomorrow that came out of this project that we more consciously can use as a way to increase our impact of the report. And it's even one of the nice consequences was that Tim texted me like, oh, it's a good idea to also start this event with asking like, who of you use this and this kind of information, and then at the end of our event ask again like, do you think differently? So like a mini small impact measurement on that event. So it already started to change the way we think and how we should plan our activities. And the third one is, yeah, of course, the proof that it gives you that your work is actually doing anything good and changing anything for future funding and future plans, and yeah, foundation of why you want to do it in the first place. So I'm very curious to hear from Open Up any ideas about how you implement this way of thinking in your everyday structuring of your organization. Like, it's been a very good experience to find out what it can do, but how do you integrate it in running an organization? But for us, it's I know it's something that we have to look into carefully for the future. So that was it, I think.